There are a bunch of other things we can talk about. I think free and fair trade is good for America. It has to be fair. It has to be fair. But free trade is good for America if it is fair and equalized. We should embrace that, particularly states like Florida. And we have to have a manufacturing base. We can no longer just be a country that does services and buys things. We have to build things in America again. And we can. And we can do it better than anyone in the world because we have the most productive workers in the world. But we can't do it with a lot of regulations, a lot of taxes, and a lot of mandates. And that's what's coming out of Washington, D.C. Now, next week we're going to talk about the costs of doing all this, because it does cost money. And look, we have to do both things if we want to put us on solid economic footing. We do have to create pro-growth strategies, because if more people are working, more companies are being created, and our economy is growing fast, that will generate revenue, more revenue. In fact, our government will take in more money than it's taking in now. But then we have to have the discipline to not make the mistakes that Republicans made in the past, of taking that revenue that comes from those tax cuts and using it to grow government. That revenue has to be used to pay down the debt. And more importantly, we have to take real measures to reduce spending. We have to roll back and freeze non-defense, non-veteran discretionary spending. We should cut the budget of the White House and the Congress by 10%. We should ban the practice of earmarks. But above everything else, we have to restructure our entitlement programs. I don't want to change a thing in Medicare and Social Security for my parents and their generation. In fact, if you're over 55, we don't have to change anything. But if you're 30 years away from retirement, like I am, we're going to have to make some changes so that the program survives, so that my two parents that depend on those programs won't see any benefits reductions. We'll talk about those issues next week. And finally, on national defense, it's important that we do things like missile defense. It's important that we take seriously the risk that radical Islam imposes on the world and on our country. Yeah. But that costs money. And that means we must have the willingness to fund the space program, to fund the military, and we need an economy that can sustain that. Because after all, the downfall of the Soviet Union was that their economy could not grow fast enough to keep pace with American defense spending. Not to mention the moral corruption that existed within the very fiber of the socialist system. All these things are the challenges that are before us. And I think sometimes those of us who were born and raised in this country in this era of extraordinary peace and prosperity are fooled into believing that this will just continue on its own in perpetuity. It won't. If we don't face these challenges, if we don't solve these problems, the country your children and grandchildren will be very different than the one you grew up in. It doesn't have to be that way. It wasn't that long ago, if you recall, that people used to say that America's best days were behind it, that soon Japan and West Germany would overtake us. Well, West Germany doesn't even exist anymore, and Japan had a lost decade, while America prospered. Because in the early 80s, we had leadership. We elected a man named Ronald Reagan to be President of the United States. He understood some very simple things. The jobs weren't created by politicians. They were created by the private sector, by everyday Americans, who created new businesses or expanded existing ones. He understood that government could not continue to spend more money than it took in. He wasn't always successful at convincing the Congress of that. And he understood that the world was a safer place when America was the strongest country in the world. And because he did, I was able to be raised in an era of relative peace and prosperity. And now what we want is the same for our children. What we want is for our children to inherit what every generation of American before them has inherited. A country better than the ones their parents had. But to do that, we must face the challenges of our time. Unfortunately, the political process is broken. And as I tell you right now, both parties are really to blame. Yeah. One of the reasons why it's broken is that there's people in charge in Washington that don't believe in the American free enterprise system. They believe Western Europe got it right and we should be more like Western Europe. I'm more than happy to have that debate with them. It's a valid debate. Let's have it. Unfortunately, they don't want to engage in that debate. Instead, they want to get into ideological name-calling. Right-wing this and ultra-conservative that. Let's debate the ideas. Let's set aside the labels. Let's judge the candidates and the people running by the ideas they present. I will tell you right now, the enormous majority of Americans believe that jobs are not created by presidents and congressmen, but by the private sector. The enormous majority of Americans believe that it is not the job of government to spend money, more money than it takes in. The enormous majority of Americans believe the world is a safer place when America is a stronger country. The enormous majority of Americans believe that the job of government is to create an environment where the private sector can grow and prosper. We're more than happy to have that debate with them. But they won't want to engage in that debate because the American people will never buy their ideas. And more importantly, will never buy the ideology behind their ideas. So instead, they'll resort to name-calling. In this campaign, you're going to see it. Marco Rubio, right-wing this and ultra that. Because they don't want to debate us on the ideas. Because they'll lose. We have to see through that and persevere. Others don't have any ideas at all. They're just running because this is what they've always wanted to be. And they will say or do anything to get elected. And so 3 months ago, they were against Obamacare and they wanted it repealed. Today, not so bad an idea. 3 months ago, 6 months ago, or 9 months ago, well, maybe they were for the stimulus back then too. My point is that we have too many people like that already in politics. Nothing personal. But we cannot afford to continue to send people to Washington, D.C. that will be, say, or do whatever they have to be, say, or do to win the next election. It's the reason why these major problems that we face have not been solved. It's the reason because no one takes this responsibility seriously. We cannot afford to continue to send people like that to Washington, D.C. So the people that cover this race love to complicate it. But it's not that complicated. It's pretty straightforward. And I say this to people all over the state. People like to define this race as conservatives versus liberals, Democrats, independents, Republicans, all this kind of stuff. Don't trouble yourself with all that. It's much simpler than that. If you like the direction of our country, if you like the way things are going, if you believe that Washington, D.C. has gotten it right over the last 18 months, then do not vote for me. There are 2 other people running. They agree with you. You should vote for them. If, on the other hand, you believe our country's headed in the wrong direction, if you believe that unless we act now, we will lose many of the things that have made us exceptional and unique, if you believe that it is important for us to create and incentivize the private sector to begin to create jobs again, if you believe that it is important for us to have a government that does not continue to spend more money than it takes in, and if you believe that the world is a safer place when America is the strongest country in the world, I'm the only one running that believes that too. If what you want is for your next U.S. Senator to be someone that will go to Washington and act as a check and balance on the direction that Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, and the President are taking our country, I'm the only one running that will do that. And that's the choice for voters in Florida. That's the choice before them right now. And that's the choice they'll have in November. And the reason why I know we're going to win is very simple. I know which one they're going to choose. I know which road the majority of voters in Florida are going to choose. They are going to choose exceptionalism. They are going to choose to keep America great. They are going to choose for their children to inherit what they themselves inherited, the single greatest society in all of human history. And that's why I need your help. This will not be an easy election because there will be a lot of factors working against us. Those who cover this race will not cover it the way I just described it to you. For them, it's much easier to cover a race that's about labels than a race about ideas. We must ensure that the people of our state know what those ideas are. And that's why I pledge to you that my campaign will be the most idea-based campaign you've ever come across. You're going to get tired of seeing my 12-point plan on this and 10-point plan on that, but they'll be real ideas. Some in the press will say, oh, these ideas are old. We've heard them before. Of course you have. You know why? Because they work. We don't have to pull a rabbit out of a hat here. They work. They've worked in the past. They've worked everywhere they've been tried, and they will work again. And so you're going to have a plan from us to stimulate private growth. It's already out. Next week, you'll have a plan for us to reduce government spending and get the debt under control, basically to diminish this debt before this debt diminishes us. Then you'll have a plan on national security. On every major issue in America, you will know, and so will your friends, what I stand for and what I will do if I get elected. Importantly, I will be the only candidate running they can hold accountable, because my ideas will be on paper. And if I don't live up to them, they can point to that and say, that's not what we voted for. To do that, we need your help. We got to work. We have to be active. We're going to open offices in Central Florida, and we need your help in those offices and in the activism that it takes to counter many of these forces that will be out there against us. I need your help financially. I used to be embarrassed to ask, not so much anymore.